Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at MS Dynamics World. On this episode, we are discussing how ERP solutions have evolved to support global supply chains even as disruptions arise. My guest on this episode is Luciano Cunha, CEO of STAEDEAN. Luciano is a real veteran of the Microsoft Biz Apps channel, as he explains, but he's also a veteran of the world of supply chain management and manufacturing. STAEDEAN is the sponsor of this episode, and we begin our discussion with some of the historical supply chain challenges that Luciano has witnessed during his career and how ERP solutions have been able to help organizations mitigate those. In today's global supply chains, ERP and related technology has a critical role to play in mitigating disruptions and providing great insights into supply chain operations. Luciano shares industry examples of STAEDEAN's experiences and offers his advice on how supply chains could evolve further in response to ongoing trade tensions. All right, well, Lou, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining. Could we maybe just start with a bit of an introduction about who you are and a bit about your experience in the Microsoft channel?
Thanks for having me, Jason. Great to be here and having this chat with you. My name is Luciano. I'm the CEO at STAEDEAN. I've been in business applications, but manufacturing first and foremost for a long time, almost 30 years now. And I've been in Dynamics for the last 17 years. So it's been quite a journey going from, really seeing everybody around ERP and Exacta and AX, the early versions of the application, and then really growing into the cloud and to where we are now, where it's not just about ERP, but it's ERP, it's CRM, it is Power Platform, it is AI and agentic business applications. So it's been quite the journey in the last 17 years. But here at STAEDEAN, we specialize in building deeply embedded solutions in the Microsoft Dynamics business applications, specifically designed for a number of industries like manufacturing, life sciences, which is process manufacturing, and equipment rental. We also have a very special focus around data, which is the backbone of all of our customers and everything that they do, from master data management to data quality and integration. So it's been quite a long career, both in manufacturing as well as in Dynamics for me.
All right, excellent. Yeah, and it sounds like your time in the sort of the Microsoft business application space is timed not too differently from mine. I think we came from very sort of different origins there, but around the same timing, seeing it evolve from sort of the on-prem world to where it is now and how the larger suite of solutions and technology around it have evolved. It's really an interesting story. But I think just as much so, that professional background and perspective that you've had kind of coming into this space and growing with it is what I really want to sort of get into with you today and some of the topics we had planned. And, we're going to sort of start. It's such an interesting time to talk about tariffs because I know it's a really something that has a real impact on supply chains. They can be announced quickly. They can be changed quickly. Multiple parties are acting and reacting in scenarios like that. We're seeing it in regard to the U.S. right now. What are some of the biggest implications for global supply chains?
Yeah, absolutely. And very much a hot topic right now, as we've seen that volatility of what tariffs can bring. And it can affect consumers and manufacturers in different ways. But they normally come to mind as people that are doing, direct importing and exporting. But really, tariffs can really impact deeply, influencing pricing, sourcing, lead times, and overall business strategies, really having a domino effect in so many different products in the marketplace. And you see with the different tariffs that are being put in place right now across the globe on raw materials, for example, metals or semiconductors, where you see manufacturers from, industrial grade manufacturers, medical devices, all being impacted by that. And in their cases, they either have to absorb these costs or they have to pass it down the supply chain, whether they are producing the end product or if they are producing parts for that end product. They've got to figure out how to do that, which creates, again, that domino effect across the entire industry, which we've seen create quite some challenges. And I think that we'll see more. There will be more things coming here soon, but these tariffs are not anything that's just new. We've seen that for many, many decades. And in that process, some of those effects can lead to having to find alternative suppliers or having to renegotiate contracts or even reconfigure the entire logistics network for a particular organization so that they can source or, deal with the complexity of the new sourcing needs that they might have as costs and also availability fluctuates across the globe. It can also impact freight logistics, and certainly companies that don't have a resilient supply chain and visibility into that supply chain can really run into trouble here.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many potential challenges just when it comes to adapting to what's changing, both in terms of policy and I think then all those downstream effects is like kind of all the different parties all react sort of globally. And if we could I wanted to also mention, you had a really interesting post on LinkedIn recently that sort of reflected, I think you were reflecting on your own experiences in manufacturing, like you were saying before, that extend beyond sort of your work with STAEDEAN and some of the ways that I guess specific tariff rules and global supply chain impacts kind of filtered through in your own time. Was it with IBM, right?
Maybe I share a little bit of that story, and this was very much connected to the challenges that Tariffs put in place. This was back in 1996 when I had to deal with this particular problem that I mentioned on my article. Indeed, back at IBM days when IBM was actually manufacturing, I was working in one of the areas, multiple different production lines that I worked with, but in this one in particular was point of sales terminals, where we had a very short time to market for the launch of this product. It was delayed, and we had a very short time or a window for us to be able to launch the product in market. This was back in Brazil. And then we had to figure out, how do we source all these parts across the globe and how do we bring this product in? One of the challenges that we had to deal with was the disruption of costs in the materials that we had, which also had a disruption in availability of some of these materials. So one of the things that we had to work with, or I had to work with, and at that point in time, was really understand what was happening across our entire supply chain to figure out how to also get around some of the tariffs that we had imposed upon us to make the product in a short period of time and make it in such a way that would be viable in that market with the right cost point that we could sell it in the market. So I remember sitting down, funny enough, back then, I had to run reports overnight because the systems, our ERP system at that point in time, very old AS400 green screen, I had to run reports and send it overnight so that I could get large printouts in the morning to be able to read through all of the different aspects of inventory that we had and parts that we had, and then go out to the procurement department to talk to vendors across the globe. Myself also negotiating agreements across the globe to try and figure out where are these parts available and what prices can we bring them in, not only buy, but also bring it in with tariffs that were imposed upon us. And in some cases, we actually had to re-engineer part of the product to be able to fit to the right parts. And you can see how tariffs can drive that, right? If prices are too high or lack of availability, causing lack of availability in certain areas, actually creating challenges for us where I had to interact closely with the engineering teams to actually either change specifications of parts or actually re-engineer the components of the overall product so that we could actually find, source, and bring it in a way that was acceptable for that scenario. And finally, what we ended up doing, long story short, we sourced parts across the globe, but we could not build at all the product outside of the country and then bring it in as a full product, though the cost and availability of the resources being mostly in Asia, it would be faster for us to build it in Asia than to build it in Brazil. So, but due to the tariffs, we actually were able to source the parts finally and bring it to Asia. Actually, the central point there was in Singapore, but then we had to break down the piece of equipment, the point of sale terminal. We had to break it down into certain components to avoid a certain tariff, which was put only on finished products. So they built it all, they broke it all apart, they shipped it to us, and then we had to build out a new assembly line in Brazil to be able to take that product, reassemble, test, and then push it out to market. So it's a great example. I know almost 30 years ago, but something that I lived through, the challenges of, different ways on how tariffs can really impact an organization. And I have to tell you, those problems have not gotten any different today than they were almost 30 years ago when I had to deal with it. And one of the biggest challenges that I had then is also one of the biggest challenges our customers deal with today, which is visibility of information across their entire supply chain, the nimble and ability to be able to re-engineer products or change product specifications, understand the impact of all of that across their production lines and inventory, and be able to react quickly to those changes continue to be one of the biggest challenges that tariffs can put on our clients today. And what we try to do is not just to help our clients react to change, but to leverage that and thrive through those changes.
Right. And, it's like you said, listening to that story, it almost, putting aside maybe the specific technology, the challenges sound very relevant and sound very current. What also jumps out at me is the things you had to do back then with your AS400 system and running reports overnight, and it's sort of the speed that you could operate with at that time and the means of communication and kind of all those just elements that were the state of things at that point in time versus today. Those were real unique challenges. And I assume that, a lot of that's advanced in really interesting ways since then, but the disruptions are still real. But maybe can you talk a little bit about what some of the adaptations might look like today to maybe handle some of those challenges?
Yeah, that's a great point, because you're right. It took me a day or 24 hours for me to be able to see and have visibility over some of that information. And I can tell you, it was not, even when I got that information, it was not as good as we see today in our business applications. We can get much faster information, and the information is much more accurate than, the early versions of MRP back then that were helping me crunch through some of that data. However, one of the great aspects of what we see today, but also becomes a challenge, which is we have way more data today than we had back then, right? Especially with multiple different systems and, connected systems and different inputs of data into the application. Of course, we have much more complex engineering applications around that as well in order to help these products come to market. And so that vast amount of data is both incredibly beneficial, especially if you can have it on your fingertips, not overnight, but right away. But it's also a huge component of a challenge that we see with customers today who have, not optimized applications for themselves. So one of the adaptations that customers are working through right now is through technology. How do they leverage different applications, whether it's, different business applications, whether it is an engineering system or an ERP system or CRM system, connected in such a good way on top of it by leveraging AI and agents to really optimize the way they not only have quick access to data, but have access to not only insights, but also having the system tell them, what the impact is and what they should be doing. Like, for example, here at STAEDEAN, we have an agent that we use for our PLM integration. So that is one of the components that we help our customers with, bringing that engineering data into ERP. One thing is just pushing data into the system, which is easy and everybody can do. The other one is what we do is having deep understanding of that business and everything that's around that to be able to take that into account. So then we are able to handle that information in a much better way. But now with agents, what we're doing is actually compiling all of that impact into one view and also proposing for the customer, hey, here's all of the impacts of this change order that's coming in from the engineering system is going to have in your system. And here's how potentially you can deal with that. And then allowing for the user to actually take those final actions. So again, one way of adapting through this massive amount of data and having some visibility is by leveraging technology to be able to do that. But obviously, technology doesn't, take you all the way. I think we've seen a lot of customers really working hard on other things, such as supplier diversification and really being able to understand where these goods are coming from and maybe finding other suppliers, maybe more local suppliers that can give them some of those goods And in some cases, they're actually moving into more regionalization, not only with their own suppliers, but also reshoring, bringing manufacturing back into their countries rather than having, manufacturing away either through suppliers or others. So all of those obviously have implications on data visibility in your systems to be able to manage all of that. But we see clients working on different areas there to make that successful.
On that last point, I imagine that those are very complex changes for an organization to execute on, right? And they don't happen overnight either. You think about reshoring. I mean, that could take years, right, to stand up the right resources and facilities and everything else. Not to mention, like you said, perhaps the changes to parts lists and bills of material, engineering changes that might have to filter through. I mean, all sorts of things that could happen in those cases. Can you talk any more about how you can actually optimize for some of those changes and sort of, I guess, see them through, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. So it is very disruptive, right? So let's not make this too light. It can be very disruptive. It can be even more disruptive for organizations that don't really have visibility over what's going on in their supply chain, or they don't have the data, or they have outdated systems that doesn't allow them to have visibility over that. And why do I say that? Because forget about the execution of all of those changes, but just the ability to make the decision. You need to be able to understand and, again, have that visibility of what's going on within your organization. And sometimes, we're working with very large organizations with multiple companies across the globe, just having visibility over everything that's going on so that they can make a good decision, whether they even need to change suppliers or what's the impact of that tariff potentially on them. And if they see a business case for reshoring, for example, which is, a pretty large order of magnitude investment there, what is the impact of that? How do they measure all of that? So this can be quite complex to even make a decision if you don't have information that can help you guide you through that decision. Or even worse, what we see is poor quality of data or fragmented data that doesn't enable organizations to even make that decision to begin with. So let's start there, right? Let's make sure that we're leveraging systems like I've talked about in the example I gave you earlier, systems that are integrated between engineering, your manufacturing, your sales applications, and all of your applications across the globe, that they're fully integrated and they have not just data, but what we see is there's just a lot of not good data, right? Having great quality data. So with our applications, we're helping customers not only integrate and connect that in a very meaningful, business-centered way with all the business logic around it, but also support ways of entering data with compliance so that we have the right data in the system. And then again, leveraging BI and agents to helping in collecting that and proposing what to do with that so we can create the right business case. But then let's get to the next level of that, which is now a decision is made and we need to change suppliers or re-engineer products or source it from different countries because of different tariffs and regulations coming in, or going as far as, having to set up a new plant locally, which is a little bit of the example that I gave you earlier. We had to set up a new line. It wasn't the whole plant, but it was a new line for assembling of those goods because we could not bring it in fully assembled. So we had to assemble locally there. So for that, again, there are a lot of steps to be able to do it. Now you've made the decision. How do you source the right materials and resource the right project to be able to manage that? So we've got part of our solutions is really helping you through that visibility across a very complex project on how to manage the execution of even being able to make those changes, whether it is something as simple as, we're going to work with different suppliers now, or something as complex as we're going to have to build a new plant locally to be able to supply to that demand now with the cost level that makes sense now that the tariffs are in place. Of course, we also see, a lot of variability on what is going to be part of these tariffs and what is not, and a lot of volatility there. So critical here is that these decisions are done with very, very good information, and they're able to execute that with a lot of control, so to minimize, additional costs in the more chaos than being able to just supply whatever goods they're selling to their customers. Make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And my next question was really if you could share any specific examples of customers that you've worked with. I mean, maybe not naming names if you don't want to, but, customer experiences, customer stories that you and your team have dealt with when it comes to navigating supply chain challenges.
Yeah, we've seen, if you talk about the broader supply chain challenges, of course, we've seen a lot of that through COVID, right? There were all kinds of shortages across the globe, and we've really worked with a lot of clients to be able to already there help in, again, I'll go back to the same word. I think I've said it many times now, visibility, being able to integrate different systems together so that they are able to get all that visibility. We continue to work through some of those same challenges with our customers today. Like I mentioned in the examples earlier, being able to have fully integrated data with great quality across many different systems. I'll use an example of a client that we're working with right now, and they've got many different countries. It's a mid-sized organization in Europe. They've got their products scattered across multiple countries, and they needed to be able to have full visibility of availability of machines or goods that they had in inventory across these many countries, and also be able to cost them locally or when they have to move from one country to the other. We were able to help them both have, integrated systems with great quality there using low code, no code data applications or solutions from our side, like our master data management or data quality studio, so that we can guarantee that the data is actually viable, and then integrate also their engineering systems into their applications so they have the flexibility of understanding the different parts that are coming in from all the different countries that they're working with to be able to produce their equipment. And then beyond that, there's another shift that we see with all of these pressures and all of the volatility that we see across the globe, because we work with a lot of industrial equipment manufacturers and project-based manufacturers, large pieces of equipment that are very expensive, and of course have a lot of complexities to be able to build that across managing multiple things across the supply chain. One of the things that we're helping them with, of course, managing that entire very complex. We have customers, this particular one, 10,000 line items in the project to be able to manage that. But beyond that, what we see is, again, with the volatility in the world today, these large equipment manufacturers are starting to look at different ways of monetizing their products. So it used to be that they would sell these large pieces of equipment for millions of euros or dollars. But as their customers are a little bit challenged right now and uncertain of what is coming next, instead of making these large capital goods purchases, they're looking for either, refurb their existing equipment or doing something else. So what we see the growth there is on the rental side, where large equipment manufacturers are actually going out and renting out their equipment rather than selling it as a capital good. That's the case for this particular example. And for their customers, the way this helps them is that then they have an annuity stream rather than a large outflow of cash up front during uncertain times. So we have our solution for rental, managing all of not only the financial aspects of that recurring revenue stream, but all of the components of managing these assets spread across many different countries, their availability, and when they're done with the equipment, how do you bring it back in, service it, and make it available again for another customer. So we've seen quite a demand increase there on that side, again, due to all the uncertainty that's going on around the world today. And we're able to help our customers stay nimble, yes, have full visibility of what's going on, allow them to change quickly by, affecting their engineering departments and making the changes that they need to make and push it out to the supply chain, but also giving them different revenue streams there in this particular case, supplying to a demand of not having to buy these large pieces of equipment up front with the large capital outflow from their customers, but giving them an opportunity to rent it out, which gives them a recurring revenue that's super valuable for them as well. So you can see here how there are actually opportunities as well in tough times if you're able to have the right systems, the right visibility, and then you can take advantage of some of these fluctuations across the globe and uncertainties with tariffs and other things happening all around us.
That's such an interesting adaptation and trend overall. And I can just imagine it has some really interesting effects on how businesses sort of do all the things that we've already talked about today and what it really means for their own supply chains and their international business and the way they structure things. I mean, it must just have a whole set of considerations there. And maybe that's a great topic for a future episode or something that we can reconnect on, because it sounds like, it's like I said, a whole can of worms to potentially dive into.
Absolutely. Happy to do so.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Anything else you wanted to share before we start to wrap up? I really appreciate getting all this perspective from you so far.
Yeah, I think we really covered how the volatility that's happening in the world today is impacting customers worldwide. And as I mentioned, I think many different times, I think if I have one big advice for customers that are struggling through figuring out how do I deal with everything that's coming at me, is to invest in visibility. It's to really be able to have great quality data that they're able to see in an easy way, and also potentially leveraging AI and agents on top of that great visibility to help them in succeeding in this turmoil that we're living in the environment that we're living in today. Having that key visibility and investing in that visibility really helps them in understanding their supply chain inside and out, which is going to help them in not just responding to all the changes and the volatility that we see in the marketplace today, but really thriving in that and giving them not only great information to create that business case, but then the ability for them to execute on that so that they can thrive in such incredibly different times that we're dealing with nowadays, and everything that's happening, may it be from the tariffs or wars that are happening across the globe. We want to be able to help our customers, and that's what we've been really focused on in helping them through this investment in visibility to integrate and have great applications fit for purpose for their industries, whether it's manufacturing, whether they're manufacturing the discrete piece of equipment or renting it out, or if they're life sciences or pharmaceutical that also have to deal with all of the supply chain challenges that we see across the globe today. So invest in visibility, leverage AI to help you drive, not just respond, but really thrive in uncertain times.
All right. Well, Lou, it's always great to hear your perspective on these types of issues. I hope we can do it again soon. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing everything.
My pleasure. Looking forward to doing this again soon.
This has been another episode of the MSTW podcast. My thanks once again to Luciano for joining. To learn more about STAEDEAN, you can visit them online, staedean.com. That's STAEDEAN.com. We will also post a link to the LinkedIn article we referenced in today's conversation. And if you'd like to understand what the weak links are in your ERP data processes in your supply chain, take STAEDEAN's Data Maturity Assessment. We'll put a link to that as well in the show notes. And that's it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, you can send me an email, jason@msdynamicsworld.com. For all of our updates, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.